Welcome to the Phillip Jordan Sports Podcast, a compelling discussion of local, regional, and national sports stories with intriguing guests. Now, here is your host, the self-proclaimed Wiregrass sports guy, Phillip Jordan.
Welcome, everybody, to the Phillip Jordan Sports Podcast here on Monday, July 13th, 2020. Thank you for making the show part of your day. I hope everybody had a fantastic weekend. It was a nice weekend down here in the southeast corner of Alabama, down in Dothan, Alabama. So I do appreciate you taking the time out and making today's show a part of your day. I hope the lighting was a lot better. That was the one feedback, I guess you say negative thing I heard last week was the lighting was not bad, but not great either. So went and invested into a ring light. And so I hope you're enjoying the lighting. Let me know what you think about that, if the lighting looks good here on the show. Got a fun show planned for you. My guest on today's show will be Peter Baugh. He covers the Missouri Tigers for the Athletics. So we're going to get back to previewing the SEC teams, of course, hoping there will be a college football season. So I'm going to do that in my open here before we bring Peter on. But before I even get into that, let you guys know you can find me in the podcast. Of course, you can see it down here in the ticker on the video if you're watching on YouTube, which if you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the YouTube page, Phillip Jordan Sports, and also hit that like button on any video you watch and leave a comment. You leave a comment on YouTube on the next edition of the show. I will address what you had to say. Now, if you're only into the audio edition, of course, you can check that out on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and SoundCloud. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe, rate, and review. If you leave a review, I will read it on a future, can't talk here on this Monday, on a future edition of the show. Also, if you want to get at me with an email me at sportstalkphilipjordan@gmail.com, and you can follow me on all the social media platforms at PJordanSEC. Going to be doing some mailbags on the show, usually on the Thursday edition, the late week edition. Get your thoughts on what's going on in sports, particularly here, cover mostly college athletics, particularly in the SEC, the little ACC Sunbelt. Occasionally we'll jump out and talk the NFL or other big things going on, but mostly I would say 80 to 90% of this show is college athletics. So for those of you that were subscribers to Talking SEC, which is now transferred over into the Phillip Jordan Sports Podcast, show is pretty much the same. So I hope you will hang on and stay for the ride on this show. And I really appreciate everybody that checks the show out every time I upload or post a new episode. So before I get into my conversation with Peter, we're going to preview the Missouri Tigers, which that's going to go a little bit different than the past couple of previews I've done, all of them really, especially when it comes to the schedule end of it, because that's what I've been doing on all the shows. So last week, after the Thursday show with Barry McKnight had been recorded, some news dropped when it comes to college athletics. Of course, on Wednesday, the Ivy League announced no fall sports. So it means no Ivy League football. But you look at that and say, well, that's not really that big of a deal. Ivy League, not big moneymaker, them pushing things off. How can that affect the big boys, the Power Five, Group of Five? Well, if you remember back in March when all the conference tournaments were getting stopped or canceled, the Ivy League was the first one to come out and say, hey, we're just not going to have a tournament. We're just going to let our season champion go to the NCAA tournament, which, of course, that never happened. Then, of course, the NBA with Rudy Gobert happened, and all the other conferences, one after another, started either canceling them altogether or stopping their conference tournaments. So now we fast forward to now. We're here in July. Wednesday, the Ivy League announces that. So and I was kind of expected if you just read the experts what they were saying. And then on Thursday, big bombshell, late afternoon, the Big Ten announced that they were going with a conference-only schedule, no out-of-conference games. So that means we're losing Ohio State versus Oregon in week 2, also losing Michigan and Washington in week 1. So two pretty big matchups. So now the Big Ten is going to a conference-only schedule. How that's going to look, I don't know. Will they just go by the schedule already in place, so you'll have bye weeks in there? I don't know. I'm sure more details will be on that in the coming weeks, and who knows what new stuff will drop, if maybe cancellations. But then, now, this is not official. Brett McMurphy tweeted out that the ACC is expected to go through the same path, but they will also kind of help out Notre Dame, because Notre Dame does have 6 games against ACC opponents this upcoming season as well. They go 5 and 6. It kind of alternates. So this year would be 6 that they would help out Notre Dame. So would Notre Dame be like for 2020 an unofficial member in football of the ACC? Of course, they are a member in all the other sports. Then on Friday, late Friday, the Pac-12 announced they will be doing the same thing. So for a majority of my audience, that impacts them with the Alabama Southern Cal game that was going to open the season up in Dallas. So that's where we stand with those. The Big 12, the Big 10, and the Pac-12 official are not going to play non-conference games, only within conference if we do have a season. The speculation, the ACC is going to go down that same road, which that also hurts. Like I said, I talked to Barry McKnight, the voice of Troy Trojans, last week. He even mentioned, hey, NC State will be coming to Troy. Well, if the ACC goes with this plan, there will be no Troy-NC State game. So there's another contest we cancel. That would be big for Troy getting NC State to come to their campus to play a game. So where do we stand with the SEC in the Big 12? Not much there. Greg Sankey was on ESPN Radio's Marty and McGee on Saturday and talked about the fact is he's worried about the season. And now we know that SEC is meeting this week. From everything I read, it looks like that meeting was already set in place. I'm sure it's a Zoom meeting. They're not actually the ADs and presidents and all that stuff, and the commissioner are not actually meeting in person. So I would expect an announcement of some sort from the SEC this next week. Of course, this podcast is releasing on Monday, so hopefully by Thursday's show, we will have some more information on the SEC side of things. So that's kind of where we are with all these conferences. The SEC has said in the past they were late July, but now with everything, it just seems like when one does it, everybody else is going to start doing it. But we all know the past history between the SEC and the Big Ten. So there is that part of that thing. So now non-conference games are out. What does this mean? Okay, for me, there's several different things I want to hit on real quickly before we bring Peter on. Of course, covers Missouri for the Athletic. First, I'll talk about, look, this is a money thing. The difference between the Power Five, the big schools, big conferences, and the Ivy League. The Ivy League does not, they don't play a playoff. They don't do all those things. They're not connected with this whole thing. And let's face it, they do not bring the money in that big time college football does within the ACC, the Big 10, Big 12, SEC, and Pac-12. So if we do see these schools play, I mean, a big part of it, a motivating factor, is obviously going to be money because they have to make some money because look, there's a lot of money lost by not having March Madness back in March. So missing a college football season would definitely hurt the schools financially and all of college athletics, really, because so much of what goes into the budget of all these universities when it comes to their athletics comes from football. I mean, that's your big money maker. I mean, some schools with basketball make money, but let's just across the board, football is the money maker. Another thing here, if you are concerned about in teams that you play outside of your conference not testing the way you would want them to, because you can't legislate that. You cannot govern that. You would have to just assume they're doing the right thing. But now if you only play games within your conference commissioner and your leadership can say, hey, we're going to have these rules in place for when we're playing each other. If you have to test on Mondays and Thursdays or something like that, then there's protocol in place. So then that makes sense. But then when you get down to list, spring has been talked about. Spring will not work. You can't do spring football. One, when are you going to start? Because let's remember, if all of college football went with this, and that's all of college football is a big question mark of the togetherness here, and I'll get to that lastly. But when you look at it from if you could play spring, you could do it. But are you going to play in March? Because it's still cold in the Big Ten and parts of the ACC. Even in the SEC, there's some schools where you can argue that it might be a little bit too cold to be playing in spring football. So you would have to think March at the earliest when you could do this. And another thing is if this virus has another uptick, if there's another surge, it's going to do it in the cold weather. I mean, that's what I gather from people I talk to. I'm no doctor or scientist, I don't know, but that's just from what I gather or what I have seen said. So, and then another reason why spring just will not work, because the NFL has said they are not moving in next year's NFL draft. And on the NFL side of things, I was going to say this: we don't know if college football is going to play. I have a lot more confidence that the NFL will have some sort of a season this fall versus college football. Just college athletics, just different deal. So now you have a guy, let's say you have a Trevor Lawrence. You think he's going to play spring for Clemson? He's not going to do it. It's not. He is going to say, I'm done. I'm going to go do the combine. And then I am going to get ready for the draft. Same thing with Justin Fields, Ohio State. So many players. You will not have the best players in college football playing because they are going to say, if you are a junior that is going to declare early or you are a senior, you're going to say, I'm not doing this. I'm getting ready for an NFL draft because I don't want to get hurt. And then it's too much to ask for me to go play college football in the spring, then turn around next fall and play in the NFL. That's just too much on the body and really safety concerns. You just can't do it. So that just will not work playing in the spring. Travel is a bad reason, in my opinion. It's a bad excuse. And this is when you're going to hear from the Big Ten and the Pac-12. And this is where I just want to poke a hole in logic if the SEC and the Big 12 do it. The Big Ten, I guess the Rutgers thing, that's a pretty good trip. But not as much Pac-12. It's pretty much good in good space, I think. But especially particularly in the Big 12 and the SEC. Look, Missouri plays in the SEC West. They should be in the East, put Auburn in the West. This problem is fixed. But that's not what we have here, so we have to figure it out. You've got Missouri taking trips, all these long trips, potentially to Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, stuff like that. That's a pretty good travel. You're not hopping on a bus to do that. And then same thing with Big 12. You have West Virginia. Look, West Virginia will have to travel to the state of Texas and Oklahoma and the state of Kansas. That's a big thing. So you can't tell me if they do that, well, it's because of travel. We want to restrict travel. Look, you got two schools in both conferences that the travel thing is kind of a loophole you can punch logic into. And here's one thing I hate. The small schools are going to suffer with this. And I'll go back because where I'm at in Dothan, an hour and a half away from Troy, this will hurt a school like Troy. Those schools, South Alabama, the UAB, the Sun Belt, the MAC, Conference USA, Mountain West Conference, the American Athletic Conference. They need, maybe not the American Athletic Conference as much as the other four, but they need those big games when they go to the Power 5 schools, basically for the money they receive. It helps out their programs tremendously. So that's another thing that's going to hurt them. I understand you're trying to keep it within your conference and you can govern that better. You can have more authority over that. But at the same time, I think there needs to be a responsibility to the bigger schools. We need to figure out a way to help these smaller schools. If Auburn, Alabama can't, like Auburn was supposed to play North Carolina week 2, Alabama was playing USC. Why can't they just step up and play Troy or South Alabama? That's my opinion, just to help those schools out. They won't play those schools because they're honestly, I think part of it, I wonder if they're afraid if we lose to one of those two, then we have nothing to gain here. Troy has everything to gain, but I just think you need to help out your little brother, your in-state schools a little bit more, and that's something Auburn, Alabama's never done, just speaking from the state I am in currently. And then finally, this is my biggest thing, and I said this on last week in my close when I had Alan Bell on the show. College football needs a leader. That's a big fault of college football right now. There's not that guy top. I know a lot of people say, well, he's still going to have to answer to somebody, but at least there's a voice, and then you could bring, like, okay, if this was the NFL or the NBA, yes, the owners are really the boss. The commissioner is just kind of like their mouthpiece in a way. Like Adam Silver is in NBA and Roger Goodell in the NFL. But at least if you had a commissioner of college athletics or just a commissioner of college football, then you would have a separate commissioner for college basketball, which that's a bigger situation that I plan on talking. If things keep going the way they're going down the line, I'll give my opinion on that. But when it comes to having a college football commissioner, then you can say, okay, all the presidents and the commissioners and president of Notre Dame would elect somebody to be their mouthpiece. But then what that would cause is for all those people to get together and then come up with a solution that everybody agrees on. And if we're going to do non-conference games across the board for everybody, I've seen some people say, well, the SEC may just play 8 or 9 and they'll cut it off there. And I've seen people talk about the Pac-12 and Big Ten may play 10 games. Look, and that's another thing. If they're going to go non-conference this season, there needs to be decisions need to be made. Okay, if we're going to do this, we all have to play the same amount of games to make it equal. And then lastly, I'll say this, maybe just for this year, and then you go back to 4. But I really think they need to, if they can, if there's a way they can do it within contracts, and that's a big deal with contracts. But this is a strange situation and something we've never seen before in this country. But expand the playoffs to 8. Because now you're going to look at, you could have 5 conference champions, all undefeated. How do we really know which conference is better than the other? By preconceived preseason rankings? I mean, that's the only way, I guess you could say, okay, well, that team we thought was going to be really good, but we don't know because there's no crossover. We really don't know which conference. I mean, yeah, you can judge by what you see from the players on the field, but I think you need those crossover, those matchups between not in the non-conference schedule to really figure out who is best, and when you try to figure out who should be the teams that go into the college football playoff. So I do believe we need to have an 8-team college football playoff this year if we go this route. So basically, you would have your 5 conference champions get in, and then the committee would pick 3 wild cards. I know it's still a tough situation. It's still the eye test. How do you know who's that? But at least that way, the 5 conference champions get in, and then we just put in 3 teams, maybe the 3 best records next. I mean, I don't know. But that's just kind of something I just was thinking about that maybe we need to expand for the college football playoff for this year. If we do get a season, trust me, I have been Mr. Positivity and Optimist about this upcoming season. But with all this going on, my optimism level has gone from here to here, and I'm worried we're not going to have a season. And look, there's more important things out there than sports and football. I know that, but this is what this show's about, sports, and then that's what we care about here on this show. That's what you care about, the listener of sports. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, that's my thoughts. A very long-winded open here on the Phillip Jordan Sports Podcast. But what do you think? If you're on YouTube watching this, post down below. Let me know what's your thoughts on college football if there is a season. And, of course, y'all can also comment on Apple Podcast or send me a message on Facebook on the podcast as well. All right, guys, let's reset the show and let me get connected with Peter Baugh, and let's talk some Missouri football with him. Everybody joining me on the podcast today is Peter Baugh, who covers the Missouri Tigers for The Athletic. This is Missouri Week here on the podcast, continuing countdown to be hopefully what we will have a college football season. But Peter, I do appreciate you taking the time coming on the show this week.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's, when I messaged you last week, I said we'll talk schedule and offense and defense. I will admit to this, I will scrap the schedule segment because we don't know what's going to be going on with that. I guess what I want to lead with you asking you, though, what's being said in Missouri from the university, or what you've seen, what you've heard about the upcoming college football season? What are they saying?
So the athletic director, Jim Sturk, has been pretty non-committal on a lot of things, where he hasn't really talked about what their level of optimism or anything like that. He's more just kind of reiterated that Missouri is planning for a number of different scenarios, and he hasn't really gone into what those are exactly, but he's just kind of said that they're planning for a lot of different contingency plans, a lot of different things that could happen. So he hasn't necessarily given a great read on how he's feeling. He's projected some optimism, but honestly, it's kind of hard, at least from an outsider perspective. Like, it doesn't necessarily feel like a particularly optimistic time for college football. And like it definitely seems like there's doubt around this season happening this fall.
Yeah, let me tell you, with me, ever since March, I was thinking college football's here. So my optimism has always been up to here.
Yeah.
I will admit, with what happened last week with not the Ivy League, but with the Big Ten, Pac-12, the ACC, and I know they haven't officially announced anything, that knocked my optimism down a little bit. Then I was like, okay, they're kind of like one step away from just saying there's not going to be a season. Where are you on that?
Yeah, it definitely feels like there are dominoes kind of falling. And where they're going to conference only schedules. These league cases are just rising around the country, especially in the Southeast. And it doesn't, to me, it doesn't feel likely. And that's not like reported from anything like that I've heard from SEC executives or anything, but just looking at the trends of what has happened in the past few weeks with the Ivy League moving the season to the spring, or I guess canceling the fall season was the wording. And then you have these conferences that are moving to conference only schedules, all while cases continue to rise without really an apparent end to that. None of that. And then you had Greg Sankey's statement yesterday or the day before, where he kind of really stressed that this is not a guarantee at this point. And that kind of, I took that to be like, I trusted that statement as being earnest. If he does not necessarily feel certain that there's a college football season coming in this fall. And if the head of the SEC doesn't feel that way, then that's a little dicey, and it's going to be really fascinating. But I think I am not particularly confident that there will be a college football season this fall. But that's just my perspective on
Yeah, because it's been the running jokes in this whole list, which, in a serious time, a running joke was that if there's one conference that will play in the fall, it will be the Southeastern Conference.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of with the Big Ten and Pac-12, they were saying, look, travel is one of the reasons for this, and you can control it. You can govern it better with under your conference. I mean, because if you're, let's say, for an SEC team, if you're playing, I don't know, like LSU plays Texas, you can't tell Texas how they have to do things, but you can control your own conference. The travel thing, though, is where I have a question, and especially from a Missouri standpoint, and I equate this to West Virginia and the Big 12. For Missouri, they play in the SEC East. I am the first belief they should be in the West, put Auburn in the East, and then everything is settled. If you're saying travel's a reason, that kind of pokes a hole in the logic, in my opinion, because Missouri is going to have to travel a long ways to play their SEC East road opponents in that scenario.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I think when it comes to scheduling, if the SEC goes to a conference-only schedule, I think it's like that we could see. We don't know what they would do if it would be. Maybe they just completely restructure the schedule where Missouri plays Arkansas, Texas A&M, Tennessee, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, and you play those 5 teams twice, and that's your 10-game season. I'm not saying that is not the report, but it's I'm just saying we don't know what they're thinking it's going to be, and if a season happens, if they would even play the SEC East teams they normally would, or if they would try to shorten the travel distance, or what. And I think what you said is definitely a good point about, because Jim Sterk, Mizzou's AD, talked about how if you have a conference-only schedule, you can kind of regulate what every team, you can set testing protocols. There's only, I believe there are 11 states represented in the SEC, 14 teams, 11 states. And so those states all have guidelines and or it's fewer states to deal with. Whereas if each school has a few non-conference opponents, then that's a bunch more different states. And now you can just make it a lot more uniform if it's all conference games. But travel will be interesting. I don't have a great read on it. I certainly think that they're going to be discussing a lot of contingency plans, and they're meeting I think Birmingham, but I know the SEC ADs are meeting when this podcast comes out. It'll be today. We're recording it Sunday, but so tomorrow for us. And I think that's probably going to be planning a lot of just discussing a lot of ideas.
Yeah, no, I'm not looking at the podcast world for some reason. Something will come out on Sunday before the podcast comes out. Then that's how it kind of goes. Maybe the SEC help me out a little bit, not do that. But anyways, all joking aside, let's just do talk about this Missouri football team. Just if we do have a season and what this team obviously went 6-6 last year, didn't go to a bowl game. And this is a question I ask everybody in these previews because, Missouri, I think, had like 3 practices. Some teams had none before everything got shut down. For you, what is the position group on this team that was probably impacted the most by not having that spring practice?
I think it's just the offense in general. I don't know about one specific position group, but the fact is they have a new first-year head coach, and Eli Drinkwitz, former Auburn guy, actually, is a former quality control coach under Gene Chizik. So he's installing a new offense that gets halted completely by the virus. So he had 3 practices of installing brand new plays, a brand new system. Whereas Mizzou's defense has continuity with the defensive coordinator being retained in Ryan Walters, and so a lot of I guess returning players, returning schemes. That's going to be less of an adjustment. But when you're learning a new offense, if you only have 3 in-person practices, that's pretty tricky. So I think I would say that just the offense in general, I know that's kind of broad, but I think that's the position group that is most affected.
When you look, of course, Missouri will be breaking in a new quarterback this upcoming season. They got it was like 4 several guys out there. Of course, you got TCU transfer Sean Robinson to Taylor Powell out there. I mean, overall, when you look at these quarterbacks, who's the guy? Is it Robinson? Maybe would be the lead guy, which is obviously he's different than the other 3 guys that would be in the competition. What are your thoughts on their quarterback? Whoever might be the quarterback we have this season.
Yeah, I think Robinson is the front runner. He was taking first team reps in the limited spring practice that we saw. And he has experience. I think it'll be really interesting to see what improvements he made because he played the 2018 season for TCU, started the first 7 games, got hurt, was battling lingering injuries, was never fully 100% after like the second or third game. So he kind of, this past year when he was redshirting as a transfer, had this time just to kind of, I guess, rejuvenate himself both mentally and physically. So I'm really curious to see the progressions he took, if there have been progressions or if he's the same quarterback that he was at TCU in 2018. So I think that's fascinating, but I would give the edge to him. I think another name to watch is Connor Bazelak, who is a true freshman last year. And he started the last game of the season actually against Arkansas because Kelly Bryant was hurt. And he looked pretty good, pretty poised in the pocket, made a lot of good throws. And I think but he tore his ACL that game. So that kind of has thrown a wrinkle in things, but now he should be ready if we get a fall camp. He should be ready for that. And like, we'll see if he's ready to, I guess, make the leap to being an SEC level starter. And then Taylor Powell's been a backup the past 2 years for Kelly Bryant and Drew Lock. He's had 1 start, struggled in his start against Georgia last year when Kelly was hurt. But he did look pretty good against Arkansas in the last game of the year when he filled in for Bazelak after he tore his ACL. So I think it's going to be one of those 3. My gut says Robinson to start, but I think it's very possible that Mizzou, if there's the season, does not start the same quarterback every game.
When I was looking over their incoming receivers, I mean, not a lot of experience there either. I mean, I think their leading returning receiver is Batty at running back, the other running back under Roundtree. So that, when you look at that, I mean, good for him. It shows he's a versatile running back. But when you look at overall teams, well, that might not be a good sign that you're back. Another running back was his leading receiver. But they do bring in Virginia Tech transfer Dane Hazelton, who had some solid numbers coming out of Virginia Tech. Outside of him, what are you seeing with the receivers that they would need to step up for those quarterbacks to be successful?
Yeah, I think I was glad you brought up Damon Hazelton. I think he was an all ACC player twice at Virginia Tech. So he's someone who maybe he can't be the number 1 receiver on a top level SEC team, but I think he's capable of being the top receiver on a solid college football team. So like a Mizzou, for example, could walk in and be a quality number 1 option at receiver. And I think if you have him as the quality number 1 option, then that opens everything up for your other receivers. So you've got Jalen Knox as a guy who last year as a sophomore really kind of disappeared, but he had a good freshman year when he wasn't expected to be he wasn't expected to be the top guy last year, but there was certainly more pressure on him. And he wasn't really able to find a groove. And now if Hazelton maybe takes some attention away from him, maybe he can take a step forward. They actually brought in a Division II transfer named, I think Kiki Chisholm is his name. And
awesome name.
Yeah. So it's kind of like that's kind of a wild card. We don't really know. I mean, he's only there for 1 year. he certainly has the build, and the staff certainly thought he was worth a shot. And I'm really curious to see how he does, if he's a player or if he's more just a guy that they thought, we'll give him a shot since it's only 1 year. It doesn't really hurt us scholarship-wise. Yeah, and then they have a few freshmen coming in. They're bringing in 4 freshman receivers. So I think they would love if one of them turned out to be a quality option at receiver. I think they've got some guys who redshirted last year that have potential. CJ Boone, Maurice Massey come to mind, and they were people with potential, but that just didn't play a ton. So it'll be curious. I'm curious to see how it comes together for them.
Of course, we talk about the quarterback and receivers. It's got to be a good luxury for this team to have a guy like Larry Roundtree coming back, which only needs 451 yards to become second all time Missouri rushing. So having him in the backfield, look, if you're quarterbacks and your receivers, you're learning a new offense, it's got to be a great luxury to have that guy in the backfield. You can lean on if there are moments where the offense is struggling. You have a guy like that you can trust. Definitely.
Larry Roundtree's a really good player. I think he probably was disappointed with his season last year, but even if you look at his numbers, they were still solid. He had, I think, 850 yards, somewhere in that range. The year before that, though, as a sophomore, he had 1,200 rushing yards in 13 games, which is really, really solid. So he can play football. He's a good player, good physical running back, good leader. He was a captain last year as a junior. I think he's someone that is a really important part of this team. And I think if the offensive line can make some improvements from last year when they really struggled, I think Larry could have a really nice year if he's got it. All of it is prefaced of if he has a chance to play.
Yeah, that's true. I was looking at his numbers right here. 5.1 career average, 26 touchdowns, 2,748 yards. Do you think there's a chance he might could surpass if we have a season? That's the thing. Now, if we had a full season, he might have a shot at number 1, wouldn't he?
Yeah, but he would have had it to have a shot at number 1. He would have to have a pretty insane year. I want to say it's like he would need like 1,500 yards. I'm not 100% sure, but like he would have to have a monster year. It wouldn't be impossible, but it would be like very impressive. I think like if there's reasonable season level of season either in the fall or the spring, I think he's definitely got a good shot to move into number 2. I think number 1 will be tricky, but stranger things have happened. He's a good player, and if he has offensive line support in front of him, I would certainly be surprised if he's able to rack up that many rushing yards, but I wouldn't be shocked. Like I think he's in line to have over 1,000 yards this season would be my guess. I know he didn't have as many yards as a junior as he did as a sophomore, but I think he's probably going to bounce back. But it's just a question of how many games will he get? Will he stay healthy? I'm curious.
Flip over on the defensive side of the ball. This team, they rank 3rd in the SEC, 14th nationally.
Yeah.
And they bring back part of the staff from Barry Odom and Ryan Walters. How important do you think, just for continuity, what that was to bring back him as defense coordinator?
I think it was really important, and I think he's someone. If you look at like up and coming coaches in the SEC, I think he's someone that comes to mind as like a guy who could potentially be. I mean, he's not probably going to hop to a Power 5 job right away, but he's someone who could be a head coach at some point at a Power 5 level program. He's probably going to have to go to a Group of 5 school first, but he's young. He really gets defenses. He really turned Missouri's defense into a really solid force last year. And that was all after, Mizzou's best player was hurt for half the season. Cale Garrett, who played 5 games, was awesome for those 5 games, and then tore his pectoral tendon and was out. And the defense still managed to have a really good year. The secondary really played much better than they had the few years before. And they've got a good safety tandem coming back with Tyree Gillespie and Josh Bledsoe. And then one of the best linebackers in the SEC, and Nick Bolton, coming back, who led the conference in regular season tackles last year.
Yeah, I was looking at his numbers. He really filled in that role when
he's a good player.
Yeah, coming in like that. And we look at corners, because last year I believe they were the best in the country at holding opponents to 50% passing when it comes to the quarterbacks. The cornerback position, you mentioned the safeties, but they're going to have to fill some holes there at cornerback.
Yes, that's very much the case. So DeMarcus Acey is out of eligibility. He is now with the 49ers. And then Christian Holmes, graduate transferred to Oklahoma State. So they're really going to have to, I guess, kind of fill in one starter role. AC was the number one corner. So you figured Jarvis Ware, who was the second starter last year, probably shifts over to the number one cornerback role. And then you've got to find someone to fill in that second spot. And there are a number of younger guys or seniors who maybe haven't played as much but have some experience that could fill in. But it'll be really interesting to see if Jarvis Ware is ready to go from being a number two cornerback on an SEC team, and that was a role he had some success in. He was solid, but he also struggled against teams like Georgia. George Pickens had a field day with him against Georgia. And I think it'll be interesting to see if he's ready to take the leap to being a actual number one cornerback on an SEC team against SEC receivers. And then you've got to find someone to hold down the fort as your number two cornerback.
And, last one on the defense, you look at the defense line, 3 or 4 starters coming back. You got Kobe Whiteside right there in the middle, 6.5 sacks. It seemed like Missouri, I remember it was a 13-14 when they made those runs to the SEC championship games. They were really good to get to the quarterback. Really? That has really fallen off the last couple of years. What do you see with them with that defensive front and how they can get pressure on the quarterback?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, so those 2013, 2014 teams, the defensive ends were unreal. I mean, you had Michael Sam win SEC Defensive Player of the Year in 2013. Then you had Shane Ray win SEC Defensive Player of the Year the next year. You had multiple NFL guys just on the defensive line at defensive end. I think now what you're seeing is Missouri hasn't really had a standout defensive end since they haven't had a defensive end get drafted since Charles Harris in 2017 drafted. The 2016 season was the last season he played. So they've they have not gotten nearly enough pressure on the quarterback, especially from the edge. The defensive tackles have actually been really solid with, you mentioned Kobe Whiteside had over 6 sacks last year. And then Jordan Elliott got picked in the 3rd round by the Browns this year. He was a really good player. I'm actually curious to see if Kobe Whiteside's able to have the same success this year without Jordan Elliott kind of blowing things up in the middle, that sometimes he would draw double teams, which would help Kobe get free and tackle the quarterback. I'm intrigued about the defensive line, the defensive ends. If they need to have, neither Trey Williams nor Chris Turner had, I think one had 2 sacks and the other, or they might have both had 2 sacks. One might have had 2.5, but not nearly enough pressure on the quarterback from the defensive end. And if you don't have pressure from your edge rushers, then that gives opposing quarterbacks more time to sit in the pocket, receivers more time to get open. You open yourself up for some big plays. So that is definitely something that Mizzou needs to address this year, and they need to, I guess, find a way to get pressure from the outside. And they'd really benefit from Kobe Whiteside being able to maintain the success he had last year.
Yeah, when you think about that, when you have a team that maybe does not get to the quarterback as much as you want, and the fact is they were still 3rd in the SEC in total defense, 14th nationally, just what they were able to do defensively despite that. That is an amazing job. They probably would have been number one if that category just went up a little bit. So that was just an amazing job by this defense overall last year when you really think about that.
Yeah, they were a really pretty solid unit. There were a few rough patches, but they played. It was a really solid defense, and Ryan Walters deserves a lot of credit for that, the defense coordinator.
So this is the point of the preview where I would go to the schedule.
Yeah.
I would ask the guest what would be reasonable expectations record-wise, but because we do not know with everything going on, what if the SEC is going full 12, what they're going to do. So instead, I just like to ask this way. When you look at Missouri, you line them up against the rest of the SEC East. Where do you see this team, if we have a season, falling in the East?
Yeah, so I think you've got obviously a top tier of Georgia. I still think Georgia's ahead of Florida. But so you've got Georgia and Florida in one tier, and then you've got, I would say, Vanderbilt kind of in the bottom. And then you've got and then you've got Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri, and and South Carolina. And I think Missouri has a shot to finish anywhere from, I think third's probably a bit ambitious, but I think realistically, I wouldn't be floored if you said Mizzou finished 3rd in the SEC. I think 3rd through 6th is anywhere within there is within reason. I would guess they'd probably be 4th or 5th would be so kind of like middle tier SEC East team. When it looked like we were going to have a full season, I think I was kind of predicting them to be around 6-6, make a bowl game, win a few SEC games. I think kind of just middle of the pack, but ideally for Missouri's future is that lays a groundwork with the new staff, and you're able to kind of go from there. after like starting. I mean, I think a bowl game with a first-year coach is fine for Mizzou, especially considering like what they're coming off of. And then if you can build off that, that's promising.
Well, let me say this, and it feels like I do not plan this, but it seems like every week I take a dig at the University of Tennessee. When it comes to the SEC East, I'm not buying the Tennessee hype yet because we saw this with Rich Jones. Derek Dooley had hype. I mean, it's just I'm not. Tennessee is going to have to prove me on the field that they are ready to take that third spot. So, I mean, Missouri. That's just my opinion on the East.
They do have some players, though. They've got. I feel like they're recruiting better than they were in the past, and I think Pruitt seems to have something going there. I don't know. It's you're right. Every time you kind of think Tennessee's like maybe got it figured out, then they kind of fall on their faces. But I do feel like Pruitt kind of has something.
Yeah, it's just me. I'm going to keep doing this. If this show ever really takes it big time, I'm not going to be welcome in Knoxville.
No, probably not.
Vol Twitter, man, you got to watch.
Wild place.
Yeah, there you are, crazy. But anyways, Peter, I do appreciate you coming on today's show to talk about the Missouri Tigers. Man, a lot of fun. And if the listeners and the viewers want to follow you online, where can they find you?
Yeah, my Twitter is at Peter_Baugh, Baugh, is how you spell my last name. And then theathletic.com, which covers all sorts of college football teams. And yeah.
All right, Peter, sounds good. And once again, I appreciate you taking the time out. Hopefully we'll have a season, and I look forward to maybe talking to you again sometime down the road.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
All right, everybody, and thanks again to Peter Baugh from The Athletic for coming on the show. I hope that didn't sound too somber of an episode there with us talking about, but it's in the news. I mean, that's what's going on right now with college athletics, what's being talked about. Will we want a season? What will it look like? And, I hope, I went pretty long there on the open, about 16, 17 minutes, I believe, talking about stuff. I really I think some people may not know and just go through my opinions on what could happen with that. Like Peter said, they are meeting SEC. I said in the open, I didn't know if it'd be Zoom or whatever, but it looks like they're going to be meeting in person, however they meet. It's going to be interesting what comes out this next week. So on Thursday's show, which you can see on the banner here, if you're watching YouTube, on Thursday I'll have CBS Sports MLB writer Danny Vietti, and we're going to do an SEC mailbag on the Facebook page right now at P. Jordan SEC. You can look at there, and there's basically a question. Will we have a season? What do you think about an all-conference schedule? So you can go check that out and give your comments there. That post will be running as a sponsored post between now and on Thursday. So you can check that out. And I have a lot of fun. Looking forward to talking some baseball. That's something I don't do a lot of, but I'm looking forward to it because baseball season is coming up in the next 2 weeks, hopefully, and get Danny's opinion on how the season will look and will it work. I mean, that's a big thing. Will it work, and how we got to this point when it comes to the labor agreements or disagreements both the players and the owners had leading up to that, because you would think, and I would think, they could have been playing by now, but they weren't. So look forward to that conversation with Danny Vietti on Thursday. But that's going to do it. Next week will be Ole Miss week. Have not nailed down a guest that covers Ole Miss yet, but that is the plan for next Monday or Tuesday. Sometimes the early week one may drop on Monday. Sometimes it may drop on Tuesday. It just kind of is influx every week. But the late week one, I'm going to try to stay solid on Thursday, unless the only time it will change and not be Thursday if for some reason the early week one got pushed to like a Wednesday or a late Tuesday, then Friday may be the day. But Thursday, Friday, mostly Thursday for the late week show. But anyways, I'm going to close this thing out, get on out of here. Once again, appreciate you if you watched on YouTube, which please subscribe, hit that like button, and leave a comment. I would love to respond to it here on the show, on Thursday show. And also, you can follow me on all social media at PJordanSEC. And, of course, the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud is the host site. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe, rate, and review. If you leave a review, I will read it on a future edition of the show. And, of course, you can always email me at sportstalkphillipjordan sportstalkphillipjordan@gmail.com. Let me get it right. Let me get the email part right. Redo that one. Come on, Phillip. You can get this together. sportstalkphillipjordan@gmail.com is the email. Of course, check out all my work for Last Word on College Football and with Dothan Wolves football on 96.9, the legendary high school football season here in Alabama. Anyways, guys, that's going to do it on a Monday, a marvelous Monday. Hope everybody has a great week, and I'll talk to you on Thursday. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to today's Phillip Jordan Sports Podcast. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to tune in to the next episode for more great sports talk.